Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are really excited to have this illustrious panel with folks from 3 different districts who are going to share with us some of their journey. And I'm just going to ask Dr. Cavazos to start and introduce himself, and we'll just go down the road. We have a mic to pass.
Sure. My name is Marcelo Cavazos. I'm the superintendent at Arlington ISD.
My name is Stephen Wertz, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer in Arlington.
My name is Kent Scribner, and I'm the superintendent of Fort Worth ISD.
My name is Charles Carroll, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer in Fort Worth.
My name is Beth Nicholas, and I'm the Deputy Superintendent in Mesquite ISD.
Hi, and I'm Dave Runland, Superintendent in Mesquite.
I'm Shannon Burke. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Engage to Learn, and it's been our honor and privilege to work with all 3 of these different districts. This is the first time they're actually, I think, coming together around this topic, so it's kind of exciting. And we actually didn't even prep together, believe it or not. And so it's going to be interesting. This is kind of the topic that we're addressing today, which is this question: what does it take to change a district culture, or to shift or move a district culture forward? And why is it so hard? What problems do you face? So I know each of these leaders really well at this point, and I know they're going to use candor and share with you some of the things that they've learned about this and how you can also apply it in your district. So I love this quote. It says, "Leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality." And I just have had the honor in my career, after being a teacher and an administrator and then going into this work and partnering with districts. I know about 350 superintendents personally, and what I will say about these leaders that you're about to hear from is that they do more than have a vision. So a lot of leaders, most leaders, actually have vision, and that's great, and you have to as a leader. But these leaders actually know how to translate that vision into reality. So when you go in their classrooms, and I encourage you to do so, please come and visit their classrooms in their districts. At scale, they are taking vision, and it's not just a plaque on the wall. They have the courage, the commitment, the conviction, and the will to make it a reality in classrooms. So a lot of people have vision, and they talk about it, and that's awesome because it's an important first step. But if you go in classrooms, you see a conflict between what's being said or what's on the plaque and what's actually happening for learners. So in cohorts, these leaders are rolling out that vision through their entire district, in every single classroom for every single learner, regardless of zip code, regardless of circumstance. And that takes a lot of courage, but that's what we need to be doing in public education to truly make a difference for every learner. So it's really exciting to have all 3 districts here willing and available to visit with you. We're going to handle this as a panel, essentially, and so we're going to ask a few questions that they're all going to answer. But I would encourage you, as you are listening, to also come up with your own questions, and we'll do some Q&A, although we have 3 superintendents on here, so I'm not sure if we'll get to Q&A. We'll see if we can get to that part. But I would, if you have some questions as we're going through that you want to ask, we're hoping to have a little bit of time to do some Q&A from the audience as well. So feel free to share that. So I just want to share one quick thing about culture, because this is also about coaching for culture. And I share this slide because it's been really instrumental in our work, and it's been really instrumental in the way we work with districts. As I mentioned, every leader has a vision. A lot of times, what you will see that vision happening in about 30% of the classrooms. And that's really just organizational theory and data from Gallup that shows that in any situation, basically any organization, not just education, that about 3 out of 10 people are kind of leading the charge, and about 5, or exactly 51%, are kind of hanging out in the middle, like kind of waiting to see, right, what's going to happen, need to be managed. And then about 2 out of 10 are actively trying to sabotage the effort. And so without being really intentional about what you're doing with your vision and how you're translating it to practice, that middle 50% tends to go a little bit more with the 20 than they do with the 30% that's leading the charge, right? So now you have really only 30%, and realizing that 30% of adults in the district, if that's all you're getting of your vision, only 30% of the learners are getting it, right? So what we want, right, is that middle 50 to go with the 30 and then the bottom 20 that you will become exposed, that will become exposed through the process, then you get rid of them, right? So, but you want that 80% push towards the vision so that more and more of your learners are getting it. And so those are the kind of techniques that we've tried to look at here and what they're doing in their districts. So I want to just start by asking each district to share, what was the origin of your idea and vision for the learner experience and how that got started in your district and the culture that you wanted to create? If you can just share a little bit about that. We'll start
So
with
we have an hour?
each.
I'm going to do the best I can to summarize it. I've been in Mesquite ISD now for 4 years, and Mesquite is a fairly large district, not as large as my compadres here, but a fairly large district, high minority, high poverty district, right? And that's our profile. And typically when you see that profile, what culture do you see? What you see is a culture of high compliance, a culture of tight system structures, a culture of significant bureaucratic processes that move from top down. And what ends up happening is you dehumanize the teacher in the classroom. They become essentially your compliance directors of your curriculum processes. They become compliance directors, in many cases, of your scripted lessons. They're literally doing things that way. And what will happen is you, as a leader, you have to walk into that and recognize the significance of that culture that has been in place, not strategy. I think one of the biggest mistakes people have is they come in with some strategic ideas. We can do this, and they land them in a culture where that simply does not work. And the end result is failure. And we see this a lot. You have to think about culture. Everyone's heard the expression, culture eats strategy for lunch, but I will tell you honestly, the problem of moving vision to reality is that people don't actually focus on cultural development. They tend to focus strictly on the strategies, and therein lies the mistake, in my opinion. So when we came in, the first thing we looked at is how do we build what we call an ownership culture? How do we move from bureaucratic think? How do we move into ownership think? Literally language like we don't use the term buy-in in our district because we're not salespeople. We're trying to create owners. We focus primarily on really getting people around the problem. As an example, when we partnered with Engage, and our partnership centered around our third grade reading initiative, and the first thing we did was we got a group of teachers from every single campus at the elementary level. For us, that's 33 campuses, from every campus, and they did their own research around the problem. Why are we struggling so much with third grade reading? Now, I can answer that question, but that's not the point. The point is that they have to own the problem. I can't bring it to them. If I bring it to them, I will get immediate resistance within the culture we have. As soon as they own that problem, they will own the initiative of solving it. And that is vital. Then you build capacity in their ability to do just that. You shift the culture. You move it away from what it was in terms of compliance. Me coming and saying, here's how we're going to solve this problem. I'm going to build your capacity to do my program, which is typically what happens. We moved it from that philosophy. And here's how it plays out. And this is, I can't tell everything because I don't have enough time, but here's how it plays out. When we walk classrooms in our district and we walk into a kindergarten teacher's classroom today, in many cases that kindergarten teacher will come up to us and we will not have asked a single question. She will tell us where her kids are in terms of on-grade reading because it is so important to her. And we don't have a district plan, if you will. We have a district framework. We really reinforce the idea that the campuses are the ones who need to build the plans based on the needs of their students. And so I just want to give you that kind of framework for thinking. Hopefully that answers your question.
That's great. Excellent.
Good morning. So for us, it was a little bit different. I'm fairly new to the district and to Texas, and Charlie and I both started in 2016. And ours actually came out of the Strategic Facilities Master Plan. We were talking about doing a bond for 2017, and the pre-planning, it was clear to me that we needed to really shock the culture. I've been a superintendent in another state for 13 years, and really hadn't experienced anything like the culture that I found in Fort Worth ISD. I simply kind of asserted that instruction should drive construction. And you would have thought that was the most cutting edge idea, that we needed to build learning environments and spend $750 million of a bond with students in mind. And so from our perspective, it really came out of that process. The only way I know how to be a superintendent is from a collective impact lens and involving community and involving our business leaders, our faith leaders, our parents, our elected officials, social service agencies, philanthropic community, etc. And so what we did was through the runway, leading up to the bond, we turned the conversation into a learning model conversation. And Charlie brought on Engage to Learn, and we started that idea in terms of what are your greatest hopes and dreams for the learning of students in Fort Worth, and the community really rallied around it. And to this day, I'll go to chamber meetings or events in the city, and folks will say, "Don't you drift from that learning model." We often in education come to these conferences and hear a shiny new product and get sucked into the educational industrial complex, and as opposed to identifying what we're going to do and sticking with it, and that's where we are.
So our journey was a little different. We started with our strategic plan and really trying to define the learner experience in every classroom in Arlington that was necessary for the students to be successful and be able to compete in the world. And so when we looked at that learner experience, we were very intentional about defining that. And so I'll just share a couple of kind of points about culture, since that's our discussion. It's really, I think, critical to be clear about culture and to be clear about the learner experience. And what does that mean? It means to actually document it, share it with people, and help people understand it and collaborate around it. So for us, when we defined the learner experience that we wanted in every classroom in Arlington, we knew that just by defining that and expecting that doesn't mean it happens. And that one big element to that is the culture of our system. And that the culture, as you've already heard, was so important for any change that it was important to focus in on it. So with the same lens of clarity for our culture, we defined cultural tenets. And through a process with our staff and with teachers and with community, etc. But always answering the question, if we want this learner experience in every classroom in Arlington, what type of culture do we need in the organization? If we want this type of learner experience in Arlington, what type of leadership do we need across the system? And then to be clear about those two things, today's about culture, but to be very clear about if this is the learner experience that we expect, and we're going to train teachers, etc., then this is the culture we need. And some of that culture deals with the cultural tenets. And we're very explicit about those cultural tenets in our system.
Let there be light. So what I think is so interesting about hearing from these three districts and kind of seeing this play out as their partner is that you can see they all started from very different places. But the process of their goal and the vision and the place they were at was different, very different. Strategic plan, long-range master facility plan, literacy initiative. Yet the process to ensure that it was going to be actionable through, through making sure that it was a culture-based change management methodology was critical. Because without that, then no matter what the goal was, it was not going to be realized. There's a lot of great results, and if we get a chance, we'll share those, but there's a lot of great results that already each of these districts has seen as a result. For example, Fort Worth ISD was able to pass their bond with a very high percentage for, and literacy in third grade on grade level reading has gone up significantly in Mesquite, etc. So the goals that they were after, but it wasn't just that path of let's get that exact thing. It was like, how do we help with the culture to make it happen? So this idea of the learner experience that they all really kind of started with as the basis of that, that's, I think, one of the things that you can see this parallel, right? They started in different places, But for all three, it was about what is the experience that we're trying to create. And that's for adults actually and learners in the system. What is the experience that we're trying to create? Being clear about it. You've heard about clarity, and I showed you their frameworks, what they were talking. Being clear about that, what experience is. And by the way, as you've all heard from all three of them, and I think it's important to note, that didn't come from these three superintendents, right? They engaged people in that process, stakeholders in that process to decide that. And then now we're talking about really rolling it out. So that's going to be the next thing, is just, okay, so you've got the learner experience defined through the process of design, etc. Then you train everybody and say, go forth and be merry and do it, right? Okay. Right, that's what we typically do in education. So we're going to talk a little bit about those next steps in terms of that. I'm flipping around on these slides to try to fit. So what we all know is that really you don't do that, because if you do that, you've just wasted all your time, money, and energy. And when they ask Dr. Scribner at the chamber, is that working? He has to say, no, because we trained on it and nobody knows how to actually do it. So there's got to be some other component, right? And so we're just going to talk for a minute then about what your both philosophy and strategy, because once you have culture in place, you can start to work on strategy, right, Dr. Brundlin? And so what is that strategy in terms of how you're rolling that out with coaching over time?
So in Arlington, we recognize that in order for a teacher to change their practice, they had to be placed in an environment where they were able to take risks. And so one of our cultural tenets is to take risks, be a risk taker. And so in order to do that, we wanted to give our teachers a space where they could practice new things and also make mistakes and have the ability to be coached around that. And so we leveraged coaching as a way of facilitating the shift in our culture by giving teachers a space to set goals around best practices and to have a coach sit side by side with them to help them in their implementation and just talk openly about what was working and what wasn't working without there feeling any kind of penalty or anything negative around that. We try to model this idea of coaching in our district from the superintendent's office all the way down to the teacher level. Both Marcel and I, for example, have coaches that work with us. And the idea is to help people know that if you're going to get better every day, which is one of our cultural tenets, you have to be able to practice. In Arlington, I would say the shift of the focus to best practice in the classroom is a hard one to make. Especially when you're working with adults. Adults aren't as pliable as students. And so we worked on what we call a responsible rollout, where we identified our first people who would be interested in change, and we leveraged that group of people to start the process of change across the system by attaching each of those individuals and their principals to coaches to help them focus their efforts around best practice and to talk about, like I said, what was working and what wasn't working.
Hi, I want to echo everything Stephen just said. I think is doubly true or equally true in Fort Worth ISD. And tracing back to what Dr. Scribner told you just a bit ago about how this all started in Fort Worth, one of the most humbling things to come out of the facilities master plan process was, I think it was on day 2 that we were working, Chris Everett was working us through something, and someone, and it was a parent at Arlington Heights High School, asked a question about, well, we're talking about modeling rooms and redesigning places and buildings. What is the district's instructional expectation? What is it that everyone wants from a teacher? Do we know? And there were probably 120, 130 people in the room, a lot of them who get paid a lot of money like me, and the answer to that question was no. All right, we've never been clear about what our instructional expectation is. And our culture was a lot like the one that Dr. Brundlin was describing. So defining that down and putting in place a visual and a verbal commitment to developing teachers who are ready to transition to a different learning model was a centerpiece for us for that next year. Now, I will say moving to a student-centered model and developing a culture of student-centeredness is a process, and I would be far from honest to tell you that we're there. We are in transition, all right? Our 30% is going pretty well, but our 70 is still coming along. So the thing I would tell you about coaching and where coaching has been challenging in Fort Worth, and you can take this as a word to the wise or an admonition or however you want, is Fort Worth may not have invented the soft rollout, but we have refined and perfected it. And so I would not say necessarily that the rollout was successful as we wanted it to be for one reason. And that is because we identified who the people who were ready to do this were, but in many cases they were isolated. All right, there was only one or two at a campus, and that's not strategic thinking. And so what we did was allow that to happen, and we created islands at campuses where people didn't have someone to bounce ideas off of. They did not have a collaboration partner, except for, in many cases, their coach. And so we're going back and looking at that a little bit more strategically so that we can build community with our coaches and teachers, and where we can avoid some of those islands and build the culture there that's going to push us as we try to ramp this to the rest of the district. That's basically where we are. And it has been quite a process thus far, but you learn from your mistakes and you go on to the next iteration. And that's where Fort Worth ISD is.
Well, much of what my colleagues described we're also doing, but what Dr. Grunland referred to with the teachers coming up with the solutions, at the end of their research and their presentations, they came up with the solution that they needed support. Well, we already knew that they needed support. We knew they needed help, but if you just say this is what you need, then they're going to reject that a little bit. So once they came up with the idea that they needed support, then we were able to start the design process. And so we designed the framework around the learning model and the literacy model in particular, because ours was a K-2 initiative to get all students reading on grade level by 3rd grade. And the teachers were involved in that process, so they owned that process. And then they took that back to their campuses and designed plans specific to their campuses that were based on the frameworks. Because each campus is a little bit different, they all have different needs, they all have different students, and that gave them some autonomy to help design that. Then we bring in the support, and so we also have the responsible rollout, and over 3 years, we've Engaged to Learn has started working with a third each year of our pre-K through 2 teachers with our coaches on each campus that shadow them, and then it's a gradual release model where they learn how to coach and work with those teachers. One of the things that we strategically thought about is that when we picked the first round of teachers, because everybody was a little reticent, like, why am I getting coached? Did I do something wrong? Is somebody in here to spy on me? What am I doing in my classroom that's not correct? And so we chose teachers who were rock stars, we chose teachers that were middle of the road, and we chose teachers that were struggling. Because as a coach that's learning how to coach, you need to experience all the different types of resistance. It's pretty easy to go in and coach someone who is a sponge that wants to learn and is ready to go. But those teachers that are a little bit more reticent, sometimes that's our veterans teachers, then they need to learn how to work with that. And the Coaches Academy that they went through, and then the shadowing process, it puts them in a position where they feel more comfortable, and then they know that what they're working on is best practices in this model that they have written. So it's not something that we just plop down in front of them. And we've seen tremendous growth from our teachers and from our students. We're certainly not where we want to be. It takes a while, but as we've done that, we've actually built in a model of sustainability, which I believe that's one of the questions perhaps coming up. But that's critical to anything that you initiate. If you do not provide the building of the capacity and you don't have the sustainability and the eyes on the process, it will go by the wayside, especially if administration changes, either at the campus or at the district level. They'll just say, oh, well, that person's gone, we don't have to do this anymore. But even when Dr. Bruin said the teachers come up to us, we've had little students come up to us and tell us what their DRA level is, which has been, they are so excited because they're setting their own goals and trying to reach those goals. And so now we are in the process of rolling this out to our other coaches at other content areas and other grade levels. And because of the way we design the framework, it can sit on top of any content. For literacy, yes, they have the literacy model that's attached to it for their best practices, but for other contents, they have other best practices that they can coach around. And so it's a continuous learning environment, and we encourage principals when you hire, make sure you hire people that want to continuously learn. We all want to continue to learn, and it's a sad day if you think that you've attained everything you need to know in your role. So we don't ever want people to think that they're only getting coached because they're struggling. It's for all teachers to become better. Even professional athletes have coaches, and so they have people that are helping them. But it's been a wonderful experience, and I'm a firm believer in the coaching model. We know from research that if you just go to a staff development and you attend and you go back, the chances of you implementing anything are very little. And the only way that you can implement something and sustain it is if you have practice around it, a lot of collaboration, and deep learning around that. In fact, after we did this, we went back and created our staff development model with those 3 tenets, so that anything that we do in professional learning opportunities is around that practice, those 3 areas.
That's great. So I just love also, again, for the audience, these 3 districts really haven't talked about this, but every time one of you says something, everybody's like, oh yeah. you're seeing the same experience. And I like what Beth was saying in terms of, coaching is not just for tier 3 teachers or tier 3 schools, right? And you don't want to give that impression, because then you don't end up with a growing learning culture, right? That's the idea of all of this. So Beth, you kind of started this topic, and I just want to ask from both of your perspective, or in every district, what have you seen so far as results? And then we'll talk about sustainability, if that's okay. So, and it can be anecdotal or data-driven. What are you seeing in terms of results that from the process that you put in place? So, yeah.
Well, the results that we've seen is, as I've mentioned, the teacher and the students coming up to us owning the process, but also when we visit with teachers, just anecdotally, they will tell us that they feel more empowered to do the work, that they know the needs of their students. They're the expert in that classroom, not us at central office. And so they feel empowered to do the work that they were destined to do or wanted to do, and their craft has come back to them. And we hear teachers telling us that all the time about how they love the ability to own what's going on in their classroom and make some decisions without the fear of getting in trouble for doing something a little different. Like someone else pointed out, we want them to take some risks, and if they see something else that is going to work better, try that with your student and see if that works. And if it doesn't, you pivot very quickly and you change to something else. And they have to have a trust and a lack of fear in order to do that, and the support.
Agree 100%. I think the successes that I would tell you in Fort Worth exist are in places where we have exceedingly strong campus principals who can take this model it themselves in staff meetings and use it continuously as a method of professional learning at their own campuses, and then have an expectation that they're going to see implementation in their classrooms. And where we have planned strategically and supported principals with professional learning, we do see that. In the areas where we've struggled is because we haven't, at a central level, provided that level of strategic thinking and support. And so it's one of those issues where having still learning, professionally active, engaged principals solves lots of problems. And it is a credit to those that we have in Fort Worth who jumped in this first iteration and pushed it at their campuses, that they've been remarkably successful. And where that hasn't happened, I'm not the sort of person who's going to throw that back on a principal who's working with only 1 or 2 teachers at their campus, trying to get that done. That's a result of us not thinking strategically, and that's a problem that we intend to address in our next iteration. So that's the plan going forward. I think the other thing that I would put out there is, and this is just word to the wise on this as well, as far as sustainability goes, that strategic planning, that strategic thinking and execution is critical. But the other thing, for those of you who are central office people who are going to be supervising coaches, who are going to be working across the highest levels of your organization, sometimes that alignment piece that's so critical for us to all be saying the same thing and rowing the boat in the same direction, sometimes that's the hardest thing to achieve in your own house. And so making sure that everybody at central office and everybody who's going to campuses, talking to principals, talking to teachers, conducting professional learning is part of the culture of change and sees this as a vehicle to drive that forward. Once you achieve that culture, the sustainability will take care of itself because this becomes a driver in your district. And so the coaches can help you get there, and changing campus culture can help you get there. But just word to the wise on that. It's sometimes easier to get teachers excited about something and moving in a direction, and principals who struggle to see this as a vehicle for change, than it is to get some of the people that you work with every day to see this as something that's going to be a game changer for the district.
Charlie, do you mind sharing, just real quickly, sorry, when we went to Glencrest 6, just results from an anecdotal standpoint, really, but just the change that you saw at that particular campus in context, because you shared it that day and it was pretty powerful.
Okay. Yes, I'll share. All right, so
You don't have to, but,
All right.
everyone's waiting to hear about it.
Glencrest 6 is one of the campuses in Fort Worth ISD that is in the southeast quadrant. Southeast quadrant has a number of campuses that are challenged, and Glencrest 6 is in its 3rd year of improvement requirement. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for us when we went in and established a transformation zone and needed a change model, that Glencrest 6 would be on the list. And I had spent a couple of days there early, and I had not been back in several months before Shannon and several people came there, I guess as a group of about 40, 45, to walk classrooms and look and see transformationally what was happening at that campus. And it was absolutely striking, the change in classroom culture at that campus. There was a high level of student engagement. Before, when I had walked Glencrest 6, just as a basis of comparison, it was not unusual at all for a teacher to be at a Promethean teaching and very few eyes on that teacher at all. And the change at Glencrest this time was absolutely striking. I didn't walk in a single classroom that was a teacher-driven classroom. Every one of them, the kids understood their role. They understood what they were supposed to be achieving for the day. They were able to self-monitor and self-direct. There were no aberrant behaviors as part of that, which Glencrest's MO up to that point had been a lot of behavior issues. And so all of the things that you look for as change that is productive are the things that we found that day. And it was really striking. There were several parents that were part of the original design group that came up with the learning model who were there at Glencrest, who are not parents at Glencrest 6. All right, but they wanted to see the fruits of their labor. They wanted to see what had happened. And as we were leaving, Shannon, I don't know if they said this to you, but they surely said it to me, is this is great. When do I get it? When does it come to my school? Because they know the reputation of Glencrest, and what they saw from what they had heard previously could not have been more different. And even when people are not openly confrontational, If they have kids at a school, they know there's going to be some things in there that need to change. And so when they see that, it is a powerful community culture transformational piece. And so Glencrest fit that for us beautifully this year. It was a great driver.
Thank you.
Well, I think what he just described is really what the biggest change is, which is it's the shift of ownership from learning from the teacher to the student. And I think that story that he just described is something that I think all the districts could replicate over and over again, which has been the most empowering part of this whole process. I think one of the things we've always said in Arlington is that the journey to the end is just as important to us as the end itself. And in education, sometimes we get so overly focused on the results that we forget the process that we're taking kids through to get there. And in Arlington, for us, that journey is the imperative. That is the thing we're trying to focus on. We feel like it's a moral obligation for us. And so for us, the biggest shift has really been the shift of ownership to students and the level and quality of collaboration with teachers around best practices, where I would say we've seen a lot of the change happen. I'll give you a quick example. We've thrown around best practice terminology in education for a long time. I think differentiation is a good word that we hear all the time. And if you were to ask your teachers what differentiation means, most of them would probably say, well, I have centers, or I have, different kinds of activities. But all of us know from the research that that's not differentiation totally. That's differentiation. There's differentiation of process, differentiation of product. There's lots of different ways. And I think this whole process has allowed us to really dive deep into what best practices are, what they look like, and then how do you coach and also provide the tools and resources to help people implement their teaching and learning process in the classroom from a best practice standpoint. And that has been a game changer for us. It shifted the way that we have talked about professional learning. It shifted the way principals have delivered professional learning to their teachers. And it's also shifted the quality of our PLCs, because we're not talking about just discussions around activities anymore. There's discussions around actual best practice. What are the things that we know statistically impacts the way kids learn in the classroom? So for us, that has been a really powerful piece in Arlington.
I was at a campus in Arlington, just to back up what Stephen was just sharing, and you have true differentiation if a learner, and I think it was like a fourth grader or third grader, you were there too, Marcel, started talking about how they didn't know the word differentiation, so they weren't using that term, but that person was saying, the learner was saying, well, the way that it works is we know in our classroom, like each one of us knows from our pre-assessment like exactly where we are and exactly where we need to go. So then we just do those things that we need to do to get there, and if we need the teacher, then we go to a workshop that she's providing. And if we don't, at that time, then we can use these things, and we know if we're a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 on that thing, and then we just, on that standard, we're just moving ourselves up. It's just like, I was just sitting there almost I was facilitating the student panel, and I was like, I'm gonna be crying now. Just because for learners to own their learning at that level, but for teachers to have a classroom set up where learners can own their learning at that level, that takes a lot on the part of the coach and the facilitator in that classroom to make that happen. But those learners completely owned their learning and knew exactly what they were trying to get done, set goals, etc. So
if I can add even just one more example, that same day we went into another classroom and students were all working on their individual activities or tasks based upon their levels, and one of the students had gone over to a table to assess herself, and the teacher had laid out all the different things that they would use to assess their learning. And at the end, I asked her, what are you doing? She's like, well, I'm checking against, my learning to see how I did. And I said, so what's next? She's like, well, I have a decision to make. And I said, well, what's the decision? I have to decide whether I have to go back and cycle again and continue to learn the process, whether I've mastered it or not, or whether I'm ready to move on to the next activity, or whether I need to go visit with my teacher. And it was this was a third grader who had, of her own volition, done the activity, assessed herself, started gauging herself against rubrics to decide whether she was in fact ready to move on to the next phase, while the teacher was pulling a small group in the back. And I think that's an example of some of the most powerful things is you actually capacitate your teachers to really work with students, because kids have choice in the matter, and the teacher is able to know exactly where each of them are and know who they need to actually spend their time with and which kids can actually learn on their own. Yeah.
Like Charlie was describing, when you're in a classroom that goes from you're not necessarily safe in that room, even emotionally or potentially even physically, to every learner is completely autonomous, and you can see that they're doing that. I mean, talk about getting kids ready for life and for their future. that's the whole ballgame. So that's a beautiful thing. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability, and then we'll take questions. So would y'all like to discuss, what is your plan for sustainability over time? These are all amazing leaders. They won't all be there forever. So how do you expect this thing to outlive you, right? And how are you gonna make all that happen?
Yeah, so sustainability that's a lot of complex kind of things that we could talk about related to that. So I'm going to just talk about a few. One is to continue to develop the culture. And we talked a little bit about culture. When we developed our cultural tenets, some of them were aspirational. And we were very clear with everyone when we presented these and we developed them. Some were affirming of the culture we had, but some were also aspirational tenets. And so those are really important distinctions that we can talk more about if you have questions about that, but about what we really want our culture to be, what we affirm. One big piece of sustainability, obviously, is the campus principle. And I'm going to talk about that because it's going back to the outcomes discussion. What we see is alignment that is becoming clearer and clearer, both by action and by design, right? And so when I talked about, well, here's the learner experience that we want. What kind of leadership do we need in the district for that learner experience to really materialize? That's a difficult question, but it's an important question because to the point of sustainability, the leadership, it plays a big role in that sustainability. Not exclusively, but a big role. So I'll focus on that. And so I'll take us back a little bit when we were designing this, and to the credit of Dr. Wertz and his team, all of our principals, just to begin to think about the ideal learner experience was a big task. Everybody came at it from different perspectives. So we went through different design of ideal learner experiences, and Stephen took all our principals through that process, where they would actually write that down and graphically design it and all this kind of stuff. Then we asked every principal to be a student for a day. Literally, from the beginning of the day, go to classroom, pick a student and shadow them the whole day. And then come out and tell us, well, was that the experience that you designed as the ideal experience? Or how did you feel as a principal? And they came back to a principal meeting. This takes time, but very intentional work. And they reported out of the ideal experience. Then we had students Skype into our principal meeting from different campuses. We have 70 plus campuses. Skyping in, talking to small groups of principals. We were asking them the same questions. And these are students, we asked the principals, pick students, not the top and not the very low, just we pick randomly students. And they were talking to small groups of principals saying, here's what I wish my classroom was like. Here's what I love about this class. And when I go to the Career Tech Center, here's what I like about that. Here's what I don't like about this. And so that internalization by leaders of here's the ideal, here's what I experienced, here's what kids are telling us, is a really important process for sustainability. It's something you're actually experiencing. We know when you experience something, it becomes more meaningful. To go now to this campus and other campuses that are implementing our active learning cycle, and to actually see fourth graders, and this is what I was reflecting on when we were at that campus visit, to see fourth graders, a lot of fourth graders who were speaking to visitors from other districts and things like that, and actually articulating the experience that we thought about 2 years ago, saying this would be the ideal experience when they would actually have a concept of mindset in the classroom and persistence. And for fourth graders to articulate that in a very short amount of time. I know a year and a half, 2 years sounds like a long time, but when you're talking big system, that's a short amount of time to get this cascade all the way to the classroom. And for fourth graders at this school to be talking about the things that we had imagined the learner experience to be is really, really powerful. And I think that's sustainability through leadership is something that we always keep in mind, culture and leadership.
Didn't you get a quote for your convocation or something from one of those fourth graders? You were like, I'm going to take
Yeah,
that.
I did.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the quote was, but I wrote it down.
I remember you saying, like, I'm writing that down, I'm using that.
Yeah, so sustainability, I mean, in large organizations, we too, over 140 schools and low income, language minority student population, all of the excuses, we pay for our priorities. So if this is a priority, then we must invest in it. I agree too that the most important lever in reform is the school principal. And We certainly need to invest in those individuals. But we need to provide our teachers with a structure and a framework within which to operate. We all represent North Texas districts, and in our region, we hire about 7,000 new teachers a year. The higher ed institutions in North Texas produce about 2,800 teachers per year. So right out of the gate, you're upside down 4,000 teachers, and you have to recruit them from other parts of Texas, other parts of the nation. And we, like many of our other large urbans, have probably a quarter of the teachers with alternative certifications. So we need to front load the professional development. We need to be aligned and invest in them and invest in the structure. So from my perspective, the sustainability piece is focus on a few things and double down on those and align the resources in that area. And we placed a big bet on engagement.
I like that line, double down on a few things. I think that's really important. I think from a perspective of sustainability, and this is really important, you really do focus in on leadership. And one of the things, and I will qualify this a little bit, not just principal leadership, but one of the things that we did, and we kind of regret we didn't do it out of the gate, is we actually created 4 new positions called Executive Directors of Leadership Development, who are also, by the way, coached. Dawson Orr has been a large part of their coaching, but they're tasked with going in and working with principals every single day, coaching them up every day. We talk about investing in the most important assets in our district, being the principals, and yet we really typically don't actually do anything other than maybe a monthly meeting or an occasional leadership retreat kind of thing. We have made it a part of our priority to make that an everyday thing. And so that has been a real blessing. And what it's brought out is the need to kind of tier that leadership development to differentiate that experience, because some of our leaders are in different places depending on what we're trying to do. But the second piece of the leadership development that I think is so important to sustainability is, and a lot of us may use different ways of talking about this, but it's creating a true distributive leadership model. The model of leadership has to flow into your teachers. They have to become leaders in an ownership culture. They cannot just be recipients of principal oversight. They actually have to be invested. And that is one of the areas where I think we can create sustainability in whatever model it is you're trying to pursue. If you can really build an investment in the part of your teachers and what is happening, and give them the authority to do it, but build their capacity to be that leader. I know a lot of you do that through professional learning communities or different structures, however you talk about it. But I think the failure in sustainability often lies in the idea that we treat it as a hierarchy, that it's central office, campus principal. You've got to build leadership through the whole system if you're really going to sustain whatever it is, the model that you're trying to create.
Thing to think about too is, and back to like the topic that we're having today, is the role that coaching actually plays in the sustainability of the process you're trying to create. One of the things we learned in Arlington is that if we don't build capacity at the schools to own the work completely themselves, meaning the coaches understand the coaching process and they actually understand the best practices and can sit side by side with teachers, and that principals are given the time and space to create the systems in their school to facilitate that process so that coaches are not hired and then do other things rather than coaching. If that doesn't take place, it will fail ultimately. You can always start an initiative by launching something from a central office standpoint and find a few high flyers that are willing to start. But if at the same time in a parallel lane you're not building systems that allow them to start to develop their own capacity and to fly on their own so that you can back out of it, it won't actually last. And so what we're finding in Arlington over the course of the last few years as we've implemented is we've had to start shifting our own thinking about how do we do this. Like when you're dealing with a district that has, in our case, 70 plus campuses, 75 campuses or so, you start to think about, well, how do I do that if this campus only has one coach and they have all of these teachers, or 2 coaches and 200 teachers? Well, just the numbers don't add up. So how am I going to do that? And so one of the things we started to think about is like, what are the systems that we start to develop at the district level and at the campus level to allow for people to begin to fly on their own and build sustainability within their own sites.
That's a really good point. Really good point. And so that coaching is not just for, year 1 implementation and then you're done, right? So we can support, and we have been with these districts. But like Stephen's saying, you know, it's intense in year one. Of course, you're trying to make that shift, but you need that ongoing coaching. And then you have, as Dr. Scribner said, you're also hiring quite a few new teachers every year. So there's that whole process as well, and bringing them on board and continue that through sustainability over time. So that's great. I'm going to ask each of them to just wrap up a statement from each district. Anything else you want to share?
So again, just for summary, I would echo the fact that our journey started in different places, but the end result is very similar, which is that learner experience that we expect in the classroom, and the systems that have to be aligned with that. And I'll tell you that if you reflect on how do you implement things and all this sort of things that can be obviously complex, I think fundamentally is when you think about the type of experience you want students to have in your system, and really give that some thought and collaborate around that, both with research but also with your own local expectation. It will be kind of your driver. And if you stay true to that, when you come back, once implementation, all these wonderful things we talked about, and you can actually see it. And that, I think, will be kind of the best outcome. But always start with the learner experience, which we've all heard along.
The other thing I would say too is I just want to encourage you to have courage. It's what Shannon was saying at the beginning. You know, we've been in this business a long time. I can speak for my own self, and one of the things I talk with my staff a lot about is we're talking about the same problems today that we were 20 years ago. The same construction that you saw that was wrote in the classroom 20 years ago, and the desks and rows are the same ones that we see today. And we have to ask ourselves the question, if we're the leaders, like, why is that still happening? If we know our kids are walking across graduation stages, going into a world that is not the same way it was back in the 60s and 50s and 70s when we were all being raised. And so I just want to encourage you to really think about that. In Arlington, we really thought about this as like what we call this moral imperative, you know, that our kids we're responsible for them, and they depend on us to prepare for them or give them a pathway that will allow them to be successful. And every year that we sit back and allow the process to continue to be wrote every year, it really lands on us as educators and leaders. So it is a process. It does take courage. It's not easy. But if this is something you're thinking about, I think it is well worth it, and I think the kids benefit tremendously because of it.
I like this visual that really relates to what they were talking about, and just to think about, you know, in your district, like, is that learner experience that they're going to be there 16,000 hours, is that actually going to lead them to the future that they want, the future they deserve, or this is a bridge that was built to withstand any hurricane in Honduras, and when a hurricane came, it withstood it. You see it still standing there, but the river moved. And that's what's happened in education. It's not fair for us to have learners that are in the system, K-12, and the river's moved, and if we haven't changed the bridge so that they can get across the other side safely, you know, like they said, it's a moral imperative. So
yeah, and teaching is hard work. We need to reflect on that and support our teachers. That is an unbelievably challenging profession, and we need to support them. And we're asking a very lofty task to create students who are part of the learning process, who work together, who communicate what they've learned, who reflect and grow and research, and talk about bridge to where we're going. If in fact what we're doing is preparing students for success in college, career, and life, and all of our mission statements, you need to only listen to what the community wants. And the Fortune 500 companies, who we all want our kids to grow up and be productive adults, they're looking for bilingual, bicultural, resilient, collaborative employees. And the one thing I've learned in 31 years in public education is that kids grow up to be adults. And so the question is, what kind of community do you want to live in?
All right, tend to be a bit of a verbal blunt instrument, so I'm just going to put this out there. And if you're going to be the person in your district who's going back and having a conversation with your board about investing in coaches, investing in a process that brings about an instructional expectation, if you're going to be that person, you need to be able to define down in very real terms why you need that. You need to believe it. And one of the things, because teaching is hard, one of the things that happens over time is that teachers and teaching trends toward intellectual stasis, because we try to make it the same. All right, we try to standardize it, I suppose would be the right way to put that. And I highly recommend, if you haven't ever gone on YouTube and pulled it up and watched it, there's a great video on there called The Myth of Average that is a fabulous video to pull up and watch to help people understand what they may be doing in their own classrooms with their students. And coaching is a vehicle to get to that point where a teacher can make day-to-day decisions that push them and their kids. Because what Stephen said earlier is exactly right. In campuses and districts that don't have that coaching mindset, they orient themselves almost exclusively toward results. And so I'm going to get better results if I just buy another pallet of STAR workbooks. Right? It doesn't have anything to do with the processes that are going on in my room. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, but you have to invest in those processes. And that's what Dr. Scribner was talking about. And so if you're that person, recognizing the difficulty that teachers are in, and then working toward investing in their change that ultimately it results in students' changes, is probably the most important work that we're doing in the district right now.
So I'll wrap it up with my sense of this. Value your teacher's voice. That is to me the most important thing. And I have a statement I use in my district, and I'll use it here now. Stop designing solutions to problems that don't exist. It is the most commonplace thing that we do. We actually, and because we're all problem solvers, and we see a problem and we want to come in and solve that problem, you really need to take the opportunity, even as you work with partners like Engage or others, as you're working with them, don't bring them in to be the solution to whatever you view as the problem. You get your teachers around the table, value their voice, let them do research into the problem, let them own that problem. It is the most important thing you can do. It will eradicate any resistance to your efforts. And when I say any, I mean any. One of the blessings of this process that we went through, without exception, I had zero resistance to the change model we put in place, and it was pretty significant. And when I say zero, I mean zero. The reticence to come on board, certainly that's there a little bit. It's like people are trying to learn, get comfortable, they're scared. All those things are normal. But the thing is, we have a cohort of teachers on every campus now who are owning the problem and owning their solution to the problem. So I want to encourage you again, value your teacher's voice. They're the ones that care about that child in that classroom. They know them. You don't know them. They do. Value their voice. Let them get around the problem. Let them be a part of designing the solution, and then bring in the capacity needs that are necessary to move that solution forward. That would be my encouragement.
If you're leaving, then apply for these amazing leaders before you find out. If you don't have any questions.